So here in this video lecture, we're going to look at Ishvara Krishna's Samkhya Karika. It's basically an outline of the Samkhya position. Samkhya is one of the orthodox schools in Indian philosophy, which means they accept the authority of the Vedas. So let's look at a basic overview of the Samkhya school. So first, there's soteriology. According to the Samkhya school, they think that suffering, that is, occurs within the cycle of reincarnation, right, of samsara, will end, so liberation or moksha will occur then, when the individual properly discerns the duality between consciousness, purusha, and materiality, prakriti. So the idea is that when an individual recognizes there's a difference between the external material world and their consciousness, the Atman, then they will stop, becoming attached to things, similar to how Arjuna was attached to his family and this idea of being afraid of performing his caste duty because of suffering that might occur in the material world. And instead, if he recognizes that there's a difference between the Atman and materiality in this way, then he would be able to follow through with his duty, do the right thing, and he would not suffer like he did in the Bhagavad Gita. So one should realize that that they are free from materiality and not bound to the world and its suffering. Now, what's their account of the world, though, of all that exists? Their ontology. For Samkhya, the universe is composed of only consciousness and materiality, those two things. So they represent, again, a kind of dualism, where all that exists in the world is consciousness and materiality. They're both real and externally existent. The universe is merely then a transformation of materiality. So one should understand then that they are no agent but merely a witness, a part of the never-ending cycle of samsara, of reincarnation. And this is why Samkhya is a kind of rationalistic school. That for them, the most important thing is coming to understand how the mind works, and then what it is the mind needs to know. So coming to a true belief, we could say, is how one is liberated from suffering in the world. And in this way, then, their focus is solely on the mind. Now let's look at their epistemology, then. The means of knowledge, similar to the Nyaya school, for example, but is different in that they do not accept comparison. They think there's only perception, inference, and reliable authority. And we should say, though, that even with perception, there is a special role the mind plays, that they don't think we just perceive things as they really are in the world, but that there's a selective ascertainment. So there's a way in which the mind discriminates upon what it sees, which is why it requires you to understand what true belief is so you can perceive things correctly as they really are. So, as they argue, the understanding of things beyond the senses is by means of or from inference by analogy, and then that which is beyond even inference is established by means of reliable authority. So again, in a way, they rely on one another. Now again, what's great about Indian philosophy is we don't only just get a way in which we can know things, know true things, but we also get a theory of how it is that we go wrong, right? How our beliefs are in error. So some of the possible ways that perception, for example, may be impossible, or the ways in which we might develop false beliefs due to a perception, is that something is too far away, or something is too close. These are pretty straightforward, right? If someone that I might know is my friend, we'll say Spencer, and he is really far away, and I can't tell if that's Spencer or maybe my other friend Spencer, two different Spencers, right? Then my perception is going to err. The same way with something being too close, right? In the same way that a camera lens gets kind of blurry and it can't really make out the details because something is too close. So it has to be in the right way. An injured sense organ. So as my eyes get worse, if I were not wearing glasses, then of course that would affect my ability to see correctly. Inattention. So maybe I am not paying attention, I'm distracted. Being exceedingly subtle. So if something actually does not have clear discerning qualities, it's going to be much more difficult to know what that thing really is. So one example could be like the difference between, an iPhone and an Android. You could take an iPhone and an Android to someone from 20 years ago, you show it to them, you're like, hey, tell me what the difference is. They're not going to know at all, right? It's only because of one's familiarity with iPhones and Androids that they know the subtle signs of the differences between the two kinds of phones, and that then they can perceive by looking at the phone, oh, this is the difference. Intervention of an object between an organ and object perceived. So, of course, if something is blocking our view, right, if we have a telescope and we're trying to perceive a planet, and something passes in between it, it's going to affect our ability to perceive correctly what we're looking at. So maybe suppression, again, something could be wrong with the means upon which we're looking at something, and then intermixture with what is similar. So again, this one, playing on subtlety, which confuses then our ability to distinguish between two different things. Now, it's the ontology of Samkhya that's really interesting and what I really want to focus on. So they argue in almost a kind of teleological way that things that exist in this world, that the cause of them actually exists prior to their coming into being. Now, they think that it's intuitive, and I probably think that, I would think that you all would think this as well, that an effect exists after a cause. So, that my moving the car forward at a stoplight when it turns green, the actual moving of my car forward when I press the gas pedal exists after the cause of me putting my foot on the gas pedal. They argue this is actually wrong. Right? This seems a bit crazy. How could you say that the effect does not exist after the cause? They instead argue the effect exists before the operation of a cause because it's necessary, without which there could be no effect. Now, what they mean is that there has to be potentiality. If there is no potential in something, then the effect of which would occur by it having the potential to produce that effect would be impossible. So they say, the effect exists because of the non-productivity of non-being, because of the need for a material cause, because of the impossibility of all things coming from all things, because something can only produce what is capable of producing, because of the nature of the cause. And again, they say, the unmanifest is the cause. It functions because of or by the interaction of the three gunas, which are pleasure, pain, and indifference, modified like water, due to the specific nature abiding in the respective gunas. So the idea is that effects always exist prior to the cause, because an effect is a bringing into actuality of potentiality. If the effect did not exist before the cause, then the cause would be no cause at all, because it would not be able to produce the effect. So if it is impossible for the watering of a seed to produce a growing plant, then the water would not serve as a cause at all. It would be no cause of anything. You need the potentiality of a seed turning into a plant, which means you need the effect, a plant existing, to already exist prior to the watering of the seed. So, they argue, it is only by the association of consciousness and materiality that anything exists at all. That without the unmanifest, there can be nothing manifest. This is again why they place so much emphasis on the mind and on rational processes. For them, again, rational processes, understanding the way in which we perceive things correctly, how we understand the way in which the world exists, that is the key for liberation from suffering in the world. That we understand how things exist, then we are no longer moved in terrible ways when we see bad things occur, right? We're not surprised by these, or we know how to deal or handle with a suffering that might occur in the world. Now, their philosophy of mind, which accounts for then the understanding of this ontology, is also extremely interesting. So the mind, they argue, actually is not just consciousness. It is both consciousness and materiality, and it has to be that way, similar to what Nyaya argued, for there to be a relationship between cause and effect at all. So they argue it is characterized by reflection or synthesis or construction, the mind is, and it is a sense because it is similar then to the senses. So the mind is both a sense because it requires sense organs and the operation of them and the understanding of them and the directing of them, as well as reflection on the very process that it undergoes when the senses actually activate, right? That I say, I want to go and look at this thing over there, and then I discern what it is that I'm looking at. Now, the only motive, then, they think, of the mind, and so the mind as an internal sense, and then the external senses of course, touch, taste, smell, hearing, and so on, right? That it is only for the sake of consciousness, then to understand the world. So the intellectual faculty or power, self-awareness, and the manas, so the mind, which these make up the internal sense organs, they act as the doorkeeper, with the external senses being the doors to conscious experience. That it is through the mind, then, in which we come to know, how the world actually exists at all, how it operates. So again, the goal is in liberation through enlightenment. So from non-attachment comes dissolution in materiality, where we no longer come to see material objects as having the cause of their value or existence in themselves, right? We come to know that they're caused by other things, whether that be potentiality or the unmanifest. From passionate attachment comes then transmigration, the cause of karma, of then our suffering produced in this life and then in the lives to come. True knowledge then of the duality of consciousness and materiality serves as the unmanifest, the possibility of enlightenment and virtue. So as they say, as in the world a man engages in actions for the sake of the cessation of a desire, so also does the prakriti, so the materiality, function for the sake of the release of the purusha, consciousness. So materiality is separate from consciousness, and materiality exists for the sake of consciousness understanding it. So knowledge then is the cause of dharma. Knowledge is the unmanifest of right action. Without knowledge, there could be no right action. There could be no morality. And if the goal is to live a good life, then one needs to know the truth. So having arrived at the point at which virtue and so on has no further cause, because of the attainment of direct knowledge, the endowed body, i.e. the body in association with Purusha, with consciousness, yet continues because of the force of past impressions, like a potter's wheel. When a potter's wheel is spinning, just because clay has been put on it and formed in a certain way, the wheel continues spinning, where the clay can be shaped further.